Hi, Emily.
Hi, Sarah.
So, Emily, you and I have had some really interesting discussions about a recent episode of The Evolving Leader featuring Dr. Ellen Langer. She's a best-selling author, she's a researcher, and a woman who has been labeled the mother of mindfulness. And I know for me, this episode is a personal favorite. As a yoga teacher in a parallel life, and I know you are as well, we hear the word mindfulness used a lot, and not always in the most accurate of contexts. And for me, it's always been in the context of meditation. But what does it actually mean, whether you're a meditator or not? And what I love about this episode of the podcast is Dr. Langer's deep dive into mindfulness at its base, at its root, and outside of how different schools of thought have used and labeled it. So she defines mindfulness simply as noticing. And this is a definition that I absolutely loved, that really resonated with me, because you can practice this anywhere and in any context. It's so much more accessible than our preconceived assumptions that we need to meditate to practice mindfulness.
Exactly. And the most powerful thing that this brings up for me is how this power of noticing, and with this, we can learn to get out of our heads and kind of more into the present. I kind of say that despite all the advances that neuroscience seems to offer us, I personally have never found anything as powerful as the tool of mindfulness and that kind of plasticity that we have in our brain and our mind to retrain and refocus our thoughts or our effort. And much of this kind of noticing for me came not from neuroscience, not from any kind of scientific studies, but this did come from my yoga mat. And I can myself recount many times that I've been in a kind of negative spiral or thought pattern or just kind of stuck in one view of the world. And engaging in a kind of mindfulness practice over the years kind of helped me focus on the present and just understand that my view is not the only one. And while I did personally learn this through yoga, I don't see yoga as the only means. I kind of just think of it as the training that I had for my mind to be able to stay present. And I can really see that people will be able to train themselves in other ways to kind of, yeah, just engage with that kind of presence and noticing more. And I always think something really interesting to bring up here is a lot of people think that mindfulness and or meditation is about switching off the mind. They just see it as simply relaxing. But in some ways, it's kind of the opposite. It's more a very controlled form of focus, just to ensure that you're not at mercy to like your kind of own wandering mind. And it kind of helps a lot of people to notice that our thoughts aren't facts but something our brain simply kind of spurts out, and then we can choose what we notice and what we pay attention to.
I love the idea of the power of noticing. And I like to think of this when I'm doing actions that I do every day. So, actions that are a bit more robotic, like trying my best to stay present while I'm brushing my teeth or while I'm taking my dog on a walk, and really being present and noticing new elements and new feelings in this familiar experience.
Definitely. And I think it's like also important to notice here how something that's really kind of super special and powerful is how our mind affects our body. And Ellen kind of talks about this, the whole it's not mind and body are separate, it's this mind body unity, they're one thing. And you only have to look at in science, the placebo effect. So where people take a sugar pill and they see the same difference as the people in like a study that are taking the drug that they're looking at, to realize that kind of what we set our minds to can really materialize into our body and into our lives. And I loved in the episode how Ellen spoke about these kind of practical takeaways that people can do. So, particularly one where when we're stressed, we can kind of engage this power of noticing and mindfulness to think, how might I understand the situation if I was being mindful? There are people in the world who are experiencing the same situation and they aren't stressed. Like, what are they doing? And how might I open up my view of the situation to see it as an advantage? So it's kind of that perspective taking, which I think when we're in the moment is really, really tough to do. But if we can kind of train our minds to do it, it's really powerful. And yeah, I know I definitely want to use some of these questions for myself moving forward when I find myself in those stressful scenarios.
Those are some really good takeaways, Emily. And you're right, it's quite challenging in application.
Yeah. So what was the biggest standout for you, Sarah?
I think you mentioned the idea of perspective, and I think my biggest takeaway was that theory of perspective, and specifically perspective around the right or the wrong decision and how we can't actually predict. So, Dr. Langer explains that there's no true right or wrong decision when you're faced with a crossroads. She says to let go of the right decision, but to make the decision right. And that was such a standout quote from her. If there's no right or wrong decision and there's no way to truly predict the outcome, how can you truly do a cost benefit analysis of the future? So instead, she suggests letting go of the right decision and making the decision right. She suggests that people in general are doing the right thing and that we can all make whatever we're facing work in general. So this got me thinking of past crossroads and past decisions that I've made, which at that time seemed insurmountable and which I took an inordinate amount of time to weigh the pros and cons of each crossroad. And thinking back, it makes me smile how much time I spent weighing possible outcomes and working with so many assumptions that I thought were predictions. And when really, no matter the decision, there wasn't a true right or wrong. It just took me on different paths. And the path that I chose, I made that path work. And this concept of perspective makes me feel so much lighter and it's quite freeing.
Definitely. Seems like the episode kind of brought about a lot of personal reflections for the both of us. But let's stop here and we can encourage everyone to head over to season 6, episode 11 of The Evolving Leader to catch the whole conversation with Dr. Langer. And there's a link in the notes.